It's important to not overreact to OTA and minicamp news, but there's definitely some ranking changes that need to be made post minicamp. So we're going to go through the top 30 wide receivers adjusted today after minicamp. So make sure to go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. So getting into our first tier right here, it's still the exact same. Jamar Chase and CeeDee Lamb at 102. That is definitely the first tier of guys here. Now with Jamar Chase, again, I think Jamar Chase is just in this unique spot where it's like, I don't necessarily believe he's going to be the number one wide receiver for a second year in a row, but it's also, I don't feel compelled enough to put him behind CeeDee Lamb or to put him behind anybody else who's behind him. Jamar Chase just flat out has the highest ceiling when both himself and Joe Burrow are involved and fully healthy. And of course, you add in a healthy T. Higgins as well. Teams are definitely going to have to make choices on a weekly basis on who to cover mostly and who to, shift the safety towards. Jamar Chase is still number one for me because the ceiling is just too high. And then CeeDee Lamb at number two, I think also belongs in this tier still. Now, the only concern that I have personally had from CeeDee Lamb this offseason has been regarding Dak Prescott. Now, Dak at one time was my favorite quarterback to draft in his range in underdog drafts. I have definitely cooled off on doing that because I read a comment from Brian Schottenheimer a couple weeks ago saying he basically views Dak as if he's in this growth period where he's going to get more out of him. It's like, dude, Dak is in his 30s. You're not squeezing any more out of Dak that Mike McCarthy hasn't squeezed out of him. He needs to let Dak be who he is. And I think if he's trying to come in and change a bunch of things, that could negatively affect CeeDee Lamb. But I still think CeeDee Lamb, just on a target percentage basis, he's going to dominate the offense. George Pickens probably, if anything, helps CeeDee Lamb to get some more off coverage based on him. If George Pickens has a good game, CeeDee Lamb's going to be great again because you put him with a healthy Dak. And if he's healthy for the majority of the season, CeeDee Lamb is a top 2 wide receiver in this first tier. Now, dropping out to our next tier, I've got Puka Nacua still at 3, and I ended up moving JJ up a spot to number 4. I originally had him at 5. With Puka Nacua, it's just a situation I love. I love this particular situation with another year of Matt Stafford, who's looking still really good. Puka Nacua in his third season, I think, is going to be fighting for a really big contract. Devontae Adams is going to come over and help draw a lot of coverage away that Cooper Kupp really couldn't do at the end of last season. Puka Nacua was kind of on his own. A lot of times when Cooper Kupp just kind of had his disappearing acts. I think there's going to be less of that with Devontae Adams because I think he's going to help draw a lot of coverage away from Puka in certain games. So really all it comes down to is Puka not getting injured. And of course, his number 3 ranking is assuming he will not get injured. And if he doesn't, he's a top 3 guy for me. Now, Justin Jefferson, I have made no secret about. Of course, JJ's a great player, and I want to draft him because he's excellent as a player, but I don't love him this year in fantasy. I don't particularly like the situation. I recognize out there that JJ McCarthy, that conversation is very volatile right now because there's a lot of believers out there, and then there's people like me who don't as much believe in him, but I do believe in Kevin O'Connell. I do believe in Justin Jefferson as a receiver, still being able to dominate as a receiving target for any different quarterback. So, of course, JJ is going to have a very stable floor. But as far as ceiling for me this year, I don't see him having a number 1 wide receiver overall ceiling. I just do not. JJ McCarthy was never asked to throw more than 20 times in a game in college. He's going to a pass-happy offense now where they're going to ask him to throw more than 30 times a game, at least 5 times a year. So there's just a lot of issues I have with the quarterback situation. But of course, Justin Jefferson is great. So I'm going to rank him here at number 4. Above Malik Neighbors, and Amon-Ra St. Brown is the guy who fell for me. Now, Malik Neighbors also shot up a couple spots here as well. And it's not because all of a sudden I'm in on Russell Wilson or I'm in on Jackson Dart. It's mostly just because Malik's great. Malik Neighbors is just a top tier guy. You see what he was able to do on a fantasy point per game basis last year. It was absolutely incredible. He had a great start to the season, and then he ended up, tailing off towards the middle of the season. But Malik Neighbors was an absolute fantastic player that looks like a budding superstar. So for me to rank him much lower than 5, it just kind of feels like a slight a little bit. I get it. It's a quarterback situation I don't love, but Malik Neighbors was still able to dominate as a player with a worse quarterback situation last year. So I think he comes into this year, is going to be really good and a top 5 guy if he can stay healthy. Now, Amon-Ra St. Brown did drop to number 6 here. I was originally really big on him. I thought this new offensive coordinator was going to come in and basically only be able to utilize the top 3 options, which would be Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Sam Laporta. And of course, we haven't seen any real games, so that might very well still be the case once we actually start seeing some real games. But one thing that did concern me about Amon-Ra St. Brown is that the new offensive coordinator did come in and basically say, like, Jameson Williams is going to be a breakout player this year. We're going to unload deep a lot of the time. Now, it's not that I think Amon-Ra St. Brown will become obscure. They need him. Like, he's their possession receiver. He's still going to get around 10 targets per game. I think what concerns me here is you couple that with the offseason knee injury that the guy had and maybe just an overall philosophy change offensively. Maybe there's not as much of a ceiling there. I think his floor is still really high, similar to a Justin Jefferson, where I don't love his ceiling this year, but I still do like his floor a lot. Now, dropping down to our next tier, Nico Collins at 7 and Rashee Rice at 8. Now, my thing with Nico, he did end up dropping a spot here. Nico Collins is just in a position where he's the clear alpha in Houston. Like, nobody's going to come in there, Christian Kirk, Jalen Noel, Jaden Higgins, and challenge him as the number 1. Nico Collins will definitely be averaging 7 to 8 targets per game. But Nico Collins, I think the real concern that I have with him is that CJ Stroud has been dealing with shoulder soreness already in this offseason. Now, that might be a big deal to some, might not be as big to others. That's a problem for me. Now, apparently he's feeling better and he's been able to throw a little bit more without limitations. It still does bother me a little bit. But of course, if Nico Collins gets a fully healthy CJ and is himself fully healthy, then Nico Collins is going to have a lot of boom games and I think will be a very overall consistent player in fantasy. And then Rashee Rice. It looks like I was right? Like, can people start to admit that? Because Rashee Rice, I've had him ranked here basically the entire offseason. And at the beginning of the Underdog drafts that started to run in like March, he was ranked as a top 25 wide receiver. His price on Underdog has steadily increased to where it is today. And you can see that number on the screen. Now, at that current price, I still think he's well worth it because this guy has a top 10 ceiling. The only thing I'm concerned about at this point is, of course, injuries. But, of course, I'm willing to overlook that because the reports about his injury with his knee have been so positive, saying that he looks really ready and he doesn't look like he has any limitations now. So imagine we get to August, he's going to be even much better. And as of right now, it doesn't look like the NFL is going to suspend the guy. So Rashee Rice should be a full go for 2025. This guy has a top 10 ceiling. People are starting to come more of my way because this is exactly where I've had him ranked all offseason. Everybody can vet that at the last rankings. Brian Thomas Jr. at 9 and Drake London at 10. Brian Thomas Jr., I'm still in this like flux position with him to where I want to keep him this high and even I want to have him at like number 7. But the fact of the matter is like Travis Hunter is going to get a lot of work. Like you do not go as a team in the NFL and trade up from the 5 spot to the 2 spot in an NFL draft, give up another future first rounder for a player that you don't plan on at least trying to make your number 1. You just don't do that. Now, I'm not even saying that Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be the number 2 in their minds heading into the season. I think, though, it's going to be a 1A, 1B situation. I think that's what they're trying to do. So that will inevitably lower Brian Thomas Jr.'s ceiling because his targets will be taken away. Now, Brian Thomas Jr. is so elite that I think he will be able to do top 10, top 12 production based off his own skill level and efficiency. I don't think there's going to be a problem there. But I do think that Trevor Lawrence is not a great quarterback. They're going to get a very good effort of giving Travis Hunter the ball 100-plus targets. I think that this is going to be a problem for Brian Thomas Jr., but not enough to keep him outside the top 10, top 12 range. Drake London at 10, Jackson Smith-Njigba at 11. Now, Drake London, I actually really have come around to him. I think Drake London is going to be a really good pick in Underdog best ball drafts and just in fantasy football in general, regardless of the format you're playing in, because this guy will dominate targets. I mean, there's no guarantee right now that Kyle Pitts will be on this team. Of course, there's Darnell Mooney, who is a really good number 2 wide receiver, but Drake London is going to be fighting for a contract this year. That's a big thing to keep in mind because this guy has still not earned his long-term deal. He's looking to earn that, and I do believe that there is going to be a bump in production because I believe in Michael Penix Jr. being a better player and a better fantasy provider than Kirk Cousins was for them last year. I think that this is going to be a big year for Drake London, possibly bigger than last year. I do think Drake London will be a really good play this year. Jackson Smith-Njigba at 11. It's interesting to see the fall that he's taken. I think he started off the offseason as like the wide receiver 14, wide receiver 15. Now he's down at the wide receiver 18 or 19. You can see that on the screen. It's interesting because I think there's a lot of uncertainty around Sam Darnold and what he's going to be able to do. My thought on it is this. Number one, Jackson Smith-Njigba is a clear number one. It's not going to be challenged by Cooper Kupp in his 30s. We can all establish that, right? So number two is going to be when you get Clint Kubiak over here from the New Orleans Saints, who, keep in mind, was a really good offensive coordinator who was really able to squeeze a bunch out of his offense last year before they all started dropping like flies to injuries. So you bring that over here to Seattle, a very talented run game awaits him. It will open up the pass. And, of course, JSN can get the ball a ton of different ways. I think Jackson Smith-Njigba is a PPR machine this year. I think in half PPR will be really good, which is what these rankings are. So Jackson Smith-Njigba doesn't worry me here in the top 12. A.J. Brown at 12, still exactly where he was last time. I don't feel like I need to change it. I think A.J. Brown is what he is. He's going to have a lot of spike weeks in fantasy like he always does. And he's going to have a lot of bust games in fantasy like he always does. Now, I went over him in a different video. Worst picks in fantasy this year. I think A.J. Brown is one of them. But I will tell you, slowly getting more on board with taking him sometimes because I do really like the spike week potential in best ball formats particularly. But in a regular redraft league, you lose 2 targets, which is what he did from 2023 to 2024, I'm going to have a problem taking you as a top 12 wide receiver. So, A.J. Brown, I've still got concerns. I think there's going to be a shift offensively this year because they just cannot force feed that much to Saquon. But I still do have issues with A.J. Brown. Definitely inside the top 10, and I still do have some issues with him inside the top 12, but he's going to stay here for now. And again, I just look at his price in Underdog, and it's like this guy's still a top 12 wide receiver, where I think it's around his ceiling in fantasy. And then I got a guy like Rashee Rice, wide receiver 13 range. This is a guy who still has room to clear that in his ceiling and what he actually will provide in fantasy. I'm going to take Rashee Rice every single time. That's what's led Rashee Rice to being one of my most drafted wide receivers in fantasy, and A.J. Brown not really taking him as much. So if you do want to go into Underdog and draft Rashee Rice at its current price, you can go down in the comments and grab the link that's there. You can use code FVN to sign up. They will match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you get in on one of these drafts right here, and you get obviously the Best Ball Mania, which is a $25 buy-in, $2 million a first, $1 million a second. That's the draft that you should be getting into. I won $19,000 playing Underdog last year, so I endorse you trying to make a big move, take a risk, try to get that big money. Now, dropping down to our next tier right here. Ladd McConkey at 13, Terry McLaurin at 14. I ended up swapping these two guys out really because of the Terry McLaurin contract situation. And it's not even that I believe Terry McLaurin's not going to play for them this year, but there is friction right now to where it makes me worry if he's not there for training camp / the offseason activities. Like, the problem I have with that is not obviously that he needs to learn the offense. He obviously knows. The problem I have with it is that he's at that age where it's like, we don't want him to tighten up. So, like, if he tightens up and then he starts practicing again like 2 weeks before the season, he'll miss a good chunk of the first part of the year. So I do worry about it from that perspective, but I still do think as long as he's out there, he's the clear number one. Jaden Daniels probably takes a step forward as a thrower, so he's going to get plenty of work. Now, with Ladd McConkey, this is a PPR monster right here. It's Jackson Smith-Njigba, but I actually prefer JSN a little bit over Ladd because I think the passing volume will be heavier in Seattle than it will be in Los Angeles. And that's still the main problem. Ladd McConkey will be the number one wide receiver. Take it to the bank. But Ladd McConkey, I just don't really have a lot of trust in to get more targets than he did last year. I think what he did at the end of last year will kind of be what he is in 2025, which is a really good player in fantasy, but probably not worth a top 12 place, which is exactly where he's being drafted in Underdog drafts right now. Dropping down to number 15, Garrett Wilson and Marvin at 16. Now, I'll tell you what, These two guys right here, I don't really know. Garrett Wilson, I'm kind of out on at this point. Not because I don't think he won't be good. Like, I do think that he's such a great wide receiver that I believe in his ability to get in the end zone and swallow up every target that he gets. I believe in that. And he will get totally targeted to a fault. Like, he'll get like 10 targets per game. But I don't believe in Justin Fields that much. And if you look at Justin Fields' best year with a wide receiver in fantasy, it was that explosive DJ Moore season. Well, the thing about it was DJ Moore that year, he had a lot of runs like that he would take the ball and just take it to the house. Like, he did a lot of that stuff on his own. Now, again, I think Garrett Wilson can do that. I think he's that caliber of player, but it's just really hard to predict that level of a touchdown season for any wide receiver. So I do have problems with him at 15, but I do think that this is kind of where his ceiling is, and that's why I'm not drafting him very much. Now, Marv, I really don't know what to do with him still. I've been really battling this one all offseason because it's a tale of two brains for me. The first side of my brain says, I love Marvin the talent, one of my favorite prospects out of college since Jamar Chase, and I just think that he's going to be a great player. I trust him to take the leap in year 2. Then the other side of the brain for me, which I've done research about this offseason, is Kyler Murray with wide receivers in fantasy. His number one wide receivers are typically barely inside the top 30. Like, that's bad. And the only year that someone was a top 5 guy was DeAndre Hopkins in 2020. But that was the outlier. So Marvin is in this weird spot to where he's with a quarterback who really doesn't perform well with wide receivers in fantasy, but he's also just this elite prospect. So I want to believe in him. I'm going to take him in Underdog several more times, but I'm definitely not for sure on this one. That's why I've got him at 16, because I ultimately believe he's got a top 5 ceiling. Now at number 17, to round this tier out, T. Higgins, again, I've discussed a lot this offseason. I don't think you should be drafting him. I think he's a really bad pick. Top 12 wide receiver in Underdog ADP. This is totally not worth the price. Does not have a top 12 ceiling. Wide receiver 2 on his own team. Loved drafting him last year. And that's the problem I ultimately have, is that I love T. Higgins as a player. Like, he's elite. But you give me T. Higgins at a wide receiver 1/high-end wide receiver 2 price point, I don't want him because he's a wide receiver 2. So he's going to be heavily dependent on massive efficiency and a lot of touchdowns. That's not realistic. But you give me T. Higgins at a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 price point, I want him all day. But we're getting him as a back-end wide receiver 1, front-end wide receiver 2 these days. I don't want him because he realistically will not get enough targets, and the touchdowns are so volatile, they'll probably take a dip this year. It's just not worth the price. Dropping down to our next tier, 18, I've got Jalen Waddle and Mike Evans at 19. Now, Jalen Waddle is in the exact same spot as he was last time. Tempted to move him up, but I'm going to keep him here at 18. You guys know, if you've watched my channel at all, I'm out on Tyreek Hill. I've gone through him several times this offseason. The age that he's at, the run that he had, there's a lot of history that would indicate Tyreek Hill is on his way down the cliff. Now, I don't think that automatically shoots up Jalen Waddle to be a top 12 guy. Like, if I believed in Jalen Waddle, the player, I'd have him ranked inside the top 12. Because, spoiler alert, you will not see Tyreek Hill in the top 30. That's how much I don't believe in him this year. But Jalen Waddle, I just don't particularly love as a true number 1. But I think by default, he will be the number 1 wide receiver in Miami this year. And he's one of my most drafted players because of that. Like, that price that he has on Underdog is so freaking stupid right now. He's in the, wide receiver 31, wide receiver 32 range. Like, that's crazy value that you get for a player who ultimately does have a top 12 ceiling. So, yes, this is a player I love to take in Underdog right now. I'm out on Tyreek Hill. I think Waddle will be the number 1, so I think it's a great pick. But I'm going to keep him at 18 because I don't particularly think that he's going to hit his ceiling entirely. 19, Mike Evans. Mike Evans is in a really weird spot for me this year. I want to believe because it's a Hall of Fame player. This is a guy who's done nothing but dominate every single year, basically, especially over the last 5 years. I want to believe in Mike. The problem I'm having right now, though, is not even necessarily directed towards Mike. It's really directed towards Mike and Chris Godwin. Let's think about this. They drafted Emeka Egbuka, right? First round guy. Everybody loved him. Like, all NFL GM scouts said, this is a year 1 guy, impact player. Then you come into minicamp. He's dominating minicamp, which, again, take it with a grain of salt. It's football in shorts. Like, it's not real football, but at the end of the day, it just makes me believe they picked this guy for a reason. Day one type of guy that maybe they're seeing Mike slow down or Chris Godwin having issues. So I'm leaning towards probably being Godwin, but Mike still is at that age where it makes me nervous to take him. So I want to keep him at 19 out of respect and out of ceiling for him, but I'm really, really getting weary of this one. So I'm going to keep him at 19. 20, Tet McMillan to round out this tier. I think he's basically being drafted around his ceiling in Underdog, which doesn't really entice me to take him. I've taken him a couple times, but not too many. And I think Tet McMillan, really, this is his ceiling. Because while I do believe that Bryce Young will be good enough to provide top 20 type of upside for Tet, I'm not a big Tet believer, and I'm just not a big Bryce believer in as far as maximizing players. I think he'll be good enough for a top 15, potentially wide receiver, but I think Tet as a player is just not as great as everybody thinks. So I'm going to keep Tet here at 20. He'll definitely be the wide receiver one. He'll get plenty of targets. I would imagine 7-8 targets per game, but we'll just see how effective he is with that. Dropping down to our next tier, I've got Travis Hunter at 21, Davante Adams at 22. Listen, like I said earlier, Travis Hunter, they're going to make a huge effort to get this guy 100-plus targets this year. Bank it. Like, this guy will do that because you do not go from top 5 pick to number 2 pick, trade a first-rounder for next year on top of that, to not get a wide receiver 1. At least someone you envision doing that. So they envisioned this for him. So Travis Hunter will be getting around the same amount of targets per game that Brian Thomas Jr. We'll just see who's more effective. I think Brian Thomas Jr. is more crafted, more polished, better wide receiver right now in fantasy than Travis Hunter is. But we could easily see Brian Thomas Jr. dominate the front half and Travis Hunter start to gain some ground in the second half. Going to keep Travis Hunter here at 21 because he's super ultra talented. Love the player, love the prospect, but I don't think he's obviously going to be better than Brian Thomas Jr. on the entire year. And then Davante Adams at 22. I really like the landing spot. Los Angeles Rams, I think he's going to be a really efficient wide receiver 2 in fantasy and a good wide receiver 2 in the NFL terms. But I don't think he's going to be a threat to Puka. I think they'll feed off each other. I think it's going to be a really efficient passing offense this year, high volume passing offense this year, but he's not a player that I'm really excited to take in fantasy because, again, I think he's basically being drafted around his ceiling. DJ Moore at 23, Xavier Worthy at 24. Now, the reason I have Worthy behind DJ Moore is because I just think you have to trust the better wide receiver. DJ Moore is a great wide receiver. Now, the only thing that scares me with DJ Moore, and I've went over this a bunch, is that Caleb is a guy who did not have a wide receiver throughout college that he loved to hyper target. Like, even when he had Jordan Addison in 2023, he didn't hyper target him a bunch. Like, this is a guy who just did not do that. He was a big spread it around type of guy. And that's the offense that Chicago was kind of set up for him. So I think DJ Moore is the best out of the bunch, but I think it's going to be a very spread out passing game to where DJ Moore is not going to have top 10 upside. I think top 15, maybe, but I think DJ Moore is more of this wide receiver 23, wide receiver 25 range. I think he'll do better with him this year. I think Caleb will be overall better, so there will be a better production sample size that we'll get from him in 2025. And with Xavier Worthy here, it really just comes down to a belief that I think Rashee Rice is a better wide receiver. No shot against Xavier Worthy. I think he will do really good in his role. But you have to really just remember this. This is a small wide receiver. Like, he's not small by height. He's like almost 6 feet tall. But this is a guy who's like 160 pounds. He's not going to be targeted 8-10 times a game. It just won't happen. They're going to get him on a lot of motion type of plays, and he will be a really efficient player, and he will get touchdowns in his role, which will mean top 25 fantasy wide receiver is a spot where I could see him finishing at, especially with Travis Hill's dip in production we will see this year. But this is not a guy that I'm tempted to rank inside the top 20, inside the top 15. I just don't have that temptation, and I like him here at 24. Now, Zay Flowers is at 25. He rose up for me, and Cortland Sutton's at 26 to round this tier out. Let me tell you about Zay Flowers. It's a guy that I'm slowly getting more and more in on. Now, Zay Flowers, I think the important thing to note here is that I've said a bunch, Zay Flowers is what he is. Like his rookie season to his second season, they were too similar to make me feel like this guy was on the precipice of breaking out. But there's a couple different things that are kind of making me believe it could be a Zay breakout year. So Zay Flowers is coming into the age category where I've studied breakout wide receivers, and the history has shown that this age that he's at, like 24 years old category, these are when guys are breaking out because they're looking for contracts. Zay Flowers is coming into his third year. I would imagine they'll pick up his fifth-year option, but he'll be playing for contract money. So I do believe that Zay could be a breakout type of player, and I think that his floor could raise a little bit. And I think that really it all comes down to touchdowns because he's not a touchdown-heavy guy. But Zay Flowers, I think, gets more targets this year, and I think could be a guy that definitely has a breakout season. So I've raised him up a couple spots. Courtland Sutton at 26, I'm fine with him here. Like, Courtland Sutton, I think a lot of people are hyped on him this year. And listen, I love the situation with Bo Nix. I think it's great. I think Courtland Sutton is a good wide receiver, but he's another year older. He's fighting for a contract, yes. But Courtland Sutton is not like he's getting any younger, right? Like, it's not like he was ever really a super explosive guy. I think that he possibly is another year slower. But Courtland Sutton, I think the other problem I have with him is they're going to be Evan Ingram to fight targets for, right? They didn't have a tight end last year that he was really fighting for targets over. Like, it was kind of just him for the majority of the part. So Courtland Sutton is going to lose a little bit of possession wide receiver role. So I think that he could lose out on production this year. But I think 26 is a good spot to put him because I still do see him as their wide receiver one. Dropping down to our last tier right here. Deebo Samuel at 27 and DK Metcalf at 28. So with Deebo Samuel, I have not made it secret at all this year. I like Deebo. Like, he's a boomer bust to a T. Like, there's no other way to explain Deebo this year. The good thing about Deebo is his price. His price is so freaking low this year that it makes me want to take him. Because the ceiling on this guy, I think, is still top 12 to top 10. But Deebo Samuel Jr., there's no question about it that he is going to be fighting for a contract this year. Like, he was so bad last year, they basically have him on a one-year deal in Washington. So he's fighting for a contract. He's super cheap. That's what's led me to him becoming one of my most drafted players. I think Deebo is in a really creative offense once again with Cliff Kingsbury, who can get the most out of him. I like Deebo at 27 with the potential and the ceiling to be a top 12 guy. DK Metcalf at 28, I think is basically where I'm comfortable at. Aaron Rodgers will provide enough games to where DK Metcalf can have a lot of boom games, like maybe 5 or 6 a year, and then there's going to be a lot of disappointments. I think he's a better version of George Pickens in this Pittsburgh Steelers offense. So that means very, very inconsistent. You won't get a ton of consistency this year, but there's going to be boom games. It makes me interested to take him in best ball in certain situations if I give him as my wide receiver 3, but I'm not super interested in having DK as my wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2. Because I think this is close to what his ceiling will be. Chris Godwin at 29 and Jamison Williams at 30 to round us out. Again, my concern with Godwin entirely rests on Emeka Egbuka, the draft pick. Someone is not showing well, or they're worried about someone in Tampa. And it could be Godwin, because I've seen they're hopeful for him to be there for week 1, but obviously that is not exactly what you want to hear. You want to hear Rashee Rice's reports. He's ready. He's got no limitations. You're not hearing that from Godwin. I love Godwin. He was great last year. I think I've underranked him for many, many years. I would like to get back to properly ranking him, but I can't do that yet because he's injured. He's another year older, and they've got Emeka Egbuka. Someone's going to suffer in this offense because of that. Chris Godwin is at 29 for now. And then J-Mo at 30, slowly getting more in on him because, again, the comments that the offensive coordinator has made right here. And Jamison Williams, again, contract year. Lots of incentive for him to be able to be a great breakout player. So I think J-Mo in this offense with Detroit is not exactly a guy that I naturally will target in a draft, but I'm forcing myself to do it a little bit more because I want to draft him just in case he does hit, and I think he has the potential to do that, and I think he's still going to be important enough in this offense to be a top 30 guy. So let me know what you think in the rankings in the comments below, and if you want to see who to target in 2025 to maximize your playoff results, click on this video right here.